So maybe we can just jump right in and I'll have you, let's define some terms. Let's define some rules of engagement, if you will, in terms of the difference between a eustressor or something that is a good stress for the body and a distressor, something that is going to lead to, negative outcomes or a negative prognosis.
Yeah, that's a great place to start. I think in terms of ground rules, one of the things that has come out of our work and the work that many others did before us is this, understanding of the mind-body connection. And for many generations in science and medicine, we have often been taught that the mind and the body are separate, and that makes understanding stress and how we deal with it very challenging. What the latest neuroscience and medicine research has shown is that the mind and the body are completely and intimately connected all the time. And so how our mind and body interact has a lot to do with how we perceive and respond to stress and recover from stress. And you mentioned, a couple different kinds of stress. And, we talk about often stress is just one thing, but it's really, there's two major camps of stress, one of which is what we call commonly as distress, which is stress that is interpreted as a survival threat to us, whether it actually is a survival threat or not. When we have distress over time, it takes resources from our body, blood predominantly, and then sends it to our stress response system, which is the sympathetic fight or flight nervous system that's responsible for getting us away from an immediate survival threat, like a predator chasing us and trying to, end our situation, to lack of air, food, lack of water, lack of shelter. These are the kinds of things that could result in an immediate end to our line, which is critically important for us and all animals to respond to quickly. And then there's all the other stress, which is what we call eustress or EU stress, which is often thought of as good stress or stress that helps us to grow. And so this would be any stress that is not actually a survival threat that we can, or stress that we think is a survival threat, but we can remind ourselves through mindfulness practices and self-awareness practices is not actually threatening to our survival. So this would be things like too many emails, traffic, challenges in our day-to-day with work or with family, social life, et cetera, or news and things that might pressure us and push us to feel uncomfortable, but are not actually an immediate threat to our survival. And so where the mind-body connection comes in is that our bodies don't know the difference by default between actual survival threat and perceived survival threat. It's up to our minds to help us remember and to remind ourselves that, if I have the opportunity to take a deep breath right now, or I can, engage in a soothing practice like soothing touch or listening to another human being or any kind of safety practice, then I can't possibly be running from a lion right now. And that helps to remind our bodies to take all of the resources we have available and send some of them back to our recovery systems, like our sleep and rest system, our digestive system, immune system, our reproductive system, our empathy and connection system, and all the parts of our bodies that we want to be getting resources when we are functioning in a safe environment, but we don't want those to get resources when we're running from a lion. So it's really about how does our body distribute its available resources, like blood, which there's only so much to go around, and how do we help our bodies using our mental techniques to guide those resources as effectively as possible for recovery.
We know that when two individuals, let's say, are exposed to the same stimuli, they may have a completely different response to it. A really easy example here, which is not necessarily related to stress, but it was a stressful time, was in the pandemic. We might see two individuals, let's say on two ends of the political spectrum, see someone wearing a mask, right? It's the same stimulus. And one individual will be like, take that mask off, right? That you don't need the mask, blah, blah, blah. And then the person on, maybe on the other side of the political spectrum will be like, oh my God, thank God this person's wearing a mask. Now I feel safe, right? So they are having a completely different experience based on their own, let's say, schemas and filters that they're sort of looking through the lens, looking at the stimulus at. Do we know anything about, And maybe that's not the greatest example because it's more of a politically charged one. I guess where I was coming from was more of a clinical lens, which is, can we infer from a person's history how they might respond to positively or negatively to a stimuli? So, we are all like, I'm living in a modern city, you're living in society, in civilization. And so we don't necessarily have, tigers. I mean, maybe, if you're living in Florida, there's like the crocodiles.
Yeah.
Worry a little bit about
Thank
that,
goodness
but
we don't have those things around all the time.
right. But we interpret the too many emails, to your point. We interpret the boss's, side eye or whatever, or the mother's call or whatever it is, as a negative event. Are there clues that we might infer from someone's history in terms of how they might interpret that stimulus?
Yeah, absolutely. And as a psychiatrist and neuroscientist, this has been a big focus of my research over the last couple decades is why do some of us interpret the same kinds of stimuli or stressors as threat versus safety? And the mask example is actually a pretty good one because it shows how, I think when we look at wearing a mask, right, just that concept, me choosing or somebody choosing to wear a mask in public because they're afraid of either contaminating somebody else with something that they might have, or they're afraid of getting sick from something that somebody else might have, doesn't really impact my safety, right? I mean, if anything, somebody I'm interacting with wearing a mask might actually make me safer. But if I interpret that there is a greater meaning to somebody else wearing a mask that has political meaning, which it doesn't. It's just a personal choice around, safety with respect to science. We know that respiratory viruses are communicated through airway particles. So, it's not really a political thing. But if I come into an experience like that with a political bias, where I'm taught or I learn beforehand that people around me shouldn't be wearing masks and that means something about them, then that will obviously shift the way that I interpret that experience to one of, this person's just trying to, they might be afraid and they're trying to protect me from them or them from me. Then that changes the way we think about it, right? And so there's the mental, emotional understanding of what does it mean to interact with somebody else who might be wearing a mask, or what does it mean to interact with somebody else who might be giving me the side eye? What can I learn about how they're feeling coming into this interaction, rather than what does it mean about me, or what does it say about me that I'm having this interaction? And that's a huge issue that we struggle with in our society, which is, the mask example is a good one, but this happens all the time. And we often find ourselves in situations interacting with other people who might be upset or might be having a situation going on where they might be afraid. And then we interpret it to mean, what is this? We ask first, what does this mean about me? Rather than asking, what is this person trying to tell me about themselves? Right. And I think that's a simple example of a great question that neuroscience and psychology really supports in the evidence, which is, if I'm interacting with somebody, it's always better to ask, what is this person saying about themselves to me? What are they trying to communicate to me about themselves? Rather than, what is this person saying or doing mean about me? Because usually it doesn't have anything to do with me, right? But if I take it personally, like out the gate, then I'm more likely to respond in a defensive way, because I'm interpreting it to mean something about me, which could threaten me or threaten my connection to my community. And so that's where the mental practices really come in, like the mindfulness, meditation, yoga, attention control, discipline practices, which we should be teaching. The evidence supports overwhelmingly, we should be teaching kids this from early childhood, which helps us to understand how to enter into situations like this and not take it personally. But I think there's other markers too, right? Like having a high resting heart rate, having a low heart rate variability that we can track with lots of different wearables. If you're falling into that camp with like a heart rate variability under 30 milliseconds, or a high heart rate resting over 70 or 80 beats per minute, chances are, from what we've seen in the science, that you're going to respond to stress in a less ideal way, meaning that you're more likely to perceive and look at a situation as distress, meaning whatever's happening around me, whether it's too much loud noise, too many emails, too many responsibilities, too much news, or somebody else wearing a mask means something about me and my safety, which it doesn't, and most of the time. And when we're in that state, when our body is less recovered, meaning it's demonstrated by high heart rate, low heart rate variability, less means less recovery, then we're more likely to respond from a position of threat. So those are just some of the markers that we can think about psychologically, mentally, emotionally, and physically that help us to predict how prepared somebody is to enter into a stressful situation.
Yeah, and it's been my observation that the more smaller, acute hormetic stressors, so we've been talking about these eustressors, so something like exercise or the breathing technique that you've been talking, breath work that you've been talking about for self-regulating your nervous system, temperature manipulation. Whenever there's, again, my observation N of one, but I'm sure that this we can replicate this on a larger scale. But whenever there's an accumulation of some of these smaller, transient, acute stressors, it often will augment the person's ability to deal with the distressor. So maybe your partner is speaking or behaving in a way that is inappropriate, or your boss, or whomever, whatever social construct or example that you might fathom, but your mental grit, let's say, is augmented when you are able to engage in some of these practices on a regular basis. And at least, for me, I can say I exercise very regularly, and it's a lot of lifting weights or some cardio, but a lot of it is lifting relatively heavy weights for my size and my frame. And I find that doing hard things, and particularly first thing in the morning, like there's a cold plunge usually in the morning, and then there's like exercise and then some meditation afterwards. Doing those things, if I can get those done in the beginning of the day, it's like the rest of the day is easy because I've already pushed myself. I've already done something that's very difficult mentally and physically, and it helps me adapt to whatever I'm going to be dealing with later that day. Would you agree?
Word that's really interesting that we don't talk about enough. And hormesis really means to put ourselves under stress in like in a safe environment. So a great example of that is like cold plunge and sauna, right? So you think about what are you doing in those situations? You're going into the sauna, you're heating your body up to a very high temperature. And then you're leaving the sauna when you're really hot and it's unbearable. And then you're going and sitting in a very, very cold environment. And then you're switching back and forth. And that creates a environment where we're exposing the body to heat stress, but we're doing it in a way where you're safe and you can get out whenever you want. But to a certain extent, the more that you push yourself gently to immerse yourself in those environments, the more you train yourself to be able to adapt to stress more effectively. And it's the same thing and I think this is actually what's so important that's also not taught well about stress, is that stress coping, stress resilience, bouncing back from stress when it comes is completely trainable. And how much we see stress as distress, survival threat versus stress we can grow from and become stronger after overcoming in a safe way is good for us. And how much we practice stress tolerance or discomfort tolerance for the small things, like doing an intense workout in the morning or doing hot cold plunge or doing even things like meditation where you have to, or mindfulness, where you're drawing your awareness to what might be the observation of uncomfortable thoughts. But as you notice them, you kind of just observe them and let them go without making any meaning or judging yourself or the thoughts themselves or the feelings. And that process trains us to be more stress adaptable, more adaptable to general things in our environment. It boosts our heart rate variability as a metric of improving adaptability. And it helps us to be closer to our full potential because we can adapt to anything, right? Like part of the beauty of being a human is that we are some of the most adaptable and most highly functioning creatures on the face of the earth. We have overcome tremendous challenge as a community and as individuals. So hormesis and this practice of building stress tolerance and discomfort tolerance is this incredible training tool that we can start when we're children and continue throughout our whole lives. It helps us to build more resilience to stress, bounce back more quickly, make more sense of stress when it comes, and adapt.
And then maybe one day we can all be Dr. Suzanne Sodberg, who's getting the Baltic Sea or wherever. I don't know exactly where she is, but it's like 2 degrees centigrade, which is about, 35-ish Fahrenheit. I have a cold plunge in my basement, and I've just gotten it down to 13 degrees centigrade, which is about 55 Fahrenheit. And I feel like I'm winning until I see that she's in like 2 degrees Celsius or, 13 or so Fahrenheit. 30 or so Fahrenheit. So something to look forward to as well as I train my cold tolerance is that, as you said, very adaptable. We're very adaptable individuals, and like working your cold tolerance is similar to working weights on a barbell, right? It's like the more you do it, the stronger the muscle gets, or the stronger your ability to withstand that temporary transient stressor becomes.
Exactly. And we see that with people like Wim Hof, right? And people who excel at this mind-body, practicing this and training this mind-body control technique, right? Where through predominantly breath and physical fitness alone, somebody like Wim Hof can swim in like Arctic waters and can not get hypothermia the way that most of us would, because he's trained his body to be resilient to that kind of stress and it translates into many other stressors. So it's absolutely trainable. And I think, and it's trainable for free, right? Like breath is free, meditation and mindfulness are free, working out and doing basic aerobic exercises in your house and doing stretching and movement are free. So the core of how we train ourselves to be more resilient actually requires no expense except time. But time is also challenging to find for many of us who have busy lives. And so that led into why we developed Apollo, which is a technology that starts to give us and remind us how to get some of those benefits of adaptability and resilience training, but when we haven't learned that coming in. And, I never learned how to do this stuff growing up and never learned it was even important. So this is really a thing that is helpful to all of us as adults.
Yeah, I have to say, I agree wholeheartedly with your earlier comment where we should be teaching our children how to do this. It should be part of the curriculum, whatever school, whatever type of school. They should all be learning how to breathe. They should all be learning how to regulate their nervous system, because as an adult, I can say that is the ultimate flex. It's like if you have a regulated nervous system, that is the ultimate flex in life versus sort of always being in this sort of sympathetic dominant state where you're just waiting for the other shoe to drop. I have a friend, she had this traumatic event happen to her where she was part of there was a terrorist attack. She ended up surviving it. But even to this day, she will walk into a room and she's scanning. She's like, okay, where are the exit points? So she does that it's part of her sort of default, and it's been ingrained and it's been activated so many times in her brain now that she walks into a room. She's like, okay, how am I if something goes wrong, if this all goes sideways, how can I get out of here? And so I think that there's a lot of individuals, you don't have to be part of a terrorist attack to engage some of this type of, I don't want to say dysfunctional, but maybe dysregulated behavior. I think that as a collective in modern life, we are stressed out and when I say stressed out, I'm saying like chronic, low grade inflammatory stress. So it's not a transient, there's a defined delta of time where it's like you're going to go to the gym for 45 minutes and you're going to crush it and then it's going to be over. It's like this is every day, all day.